looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time, what would you think it's worth telling that generation?
Mind spins in spirals like the card course you throw. I think, therefore, but do I even know? Hume said the sun might not rise in the morning. Patterns ain't proof, just habits we adorn. Russell's teapot floating out in the void. Invisible doubts that can't be destroyed. Belief ain't a bird and the skeptic employs. Question the noise, the cosmos ploys. Skeptic's eyes always peeping the fraud. Truth ain't handed down, it's wrestled from the gods. Doubts my temple, my faith is flawed. Think it through twice before I applaud. Induction wobbles like a table with no leg. Hume's knife cuts leave certainty begging. A billion white swans, burn black renegade. Shatter the mirror, the cracks cascade. Cogito feels strong, but is it really? Thoughts build castles, clouds act silly. Russell's pot spins in the ether so freely. Prove it exists or the claim's too dreamy. Am I the dreamer or the dream in the show? The car wrestled devils, still didn't know. Faith and senses, they play tricks on a low. Truth's a mirage in a desert of woe.
When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts.
Hello, wonderful people, and welcome once again to Skeptic Philosophy. I, as always, am your host, Robert. Today we have a special guest on, Mr. Willow from Deviant Robot, a gentleman that I have spent a fair amount of time conversating with and have enjoyed the conversations greatly. So we'll bring him on. Willow, how does it?
Good. I was just enjoying your Bertrand Russell at the beginning of the intro, the old Charlotte. Bertrand Russell was such a fantastic character that I feel is somewhat fallen off these days a little bit as people have philosophically moved on. But I think he's such a great character and a wonderfully accessible, surprisingly accessible introduction to philosophy. Have you ever read his History of Western Philosophy?
I didn't. The first book I actually read in philosophy at all was The Problem of Philosophy from Bertrand Russell. That was the very first book I ever read. And it set me on fire. So that was a good introduction. He had, it's not as if he broke a lot of ground. His was more analytic philosophy. So maybe with set theory, he broke a little bit of ground, but primarily he was able to have the foreknowledge of all of the people before. And there's a lot of citation that he uses of previous philosophers.
There's just something so wonderfully illustrative of a man sitting at a writing desk saying, look, let's just start from where I'm sitting. Let's just talk about this desk. What do we know about this desk? And
exactly.
I think it's one of the things I found about great writers, especially, and great thinkers throughout the history of philosophy, is that they tend to make philosophy more accessible, not less. And yet there's a very modern trend of sort of obfuscation and charlatanry and just esoteric language makes it difficult. But ultimately, philosophy speaks to human nature and human problems and human realities, and I think that Bertrand Russell was excellent at and commendably clear in his ability to sort of say, hey, let's just work this through, let's just think this through clearly. It's just fantastic stuff.
Great guy. I love that him, of all the philosophers that still have some relevance, there's actual video of him talking. So that's a big one.
He's a YouTuber. Yes, when I had exactly the same experience where I was looking on I don't know why I was Googling for things, and I came across this BBC archived footage of him sitting there being interviewed, and he was like 9 million years old, at this point, and he's still as lucid as a bell. He's just absolutely sitting there, speaking honestly and clearly and precisely. That clarity of language really does oftentimes, I think, echo a clarity of thought. The ability to put something simply. Einstein said something similar. Well, I think it's a paraphrase of Einstein, or at least maybe it's anachronistically associated with Einstein, but the idea that if you truly understand something, you should be able to explain it to your grandmother. This idea that things should be made simple, as simple as possible, but no simpler.
We get a lot of quotes on that subject that obviously they're not the exact quotes, but there's, it seems like I had this conversation with somebody recently about that you should be able to explain it to a 6-year-old, I think is how some of them say it. But these are just, modifications throughout time. But yes, this ideal has been held by a lot of epistemological philosophers. So.
Absolutely. So, sorry, go.
With that said, we'll get into it. Generally, I always let the guests pick a subject, and the one that you picked was uncertainty, and I think it's a fantastic subject. So we'll get into what does it actually mean to be honest about not knowing.
Yeah, I love this topic. I've been really interested. I think I was saying to you earlier, I think I'm uniquely unqualified to speak about anything that we're going to talk about today. I've watched some of your prior shows, and you seem to have a plethora of academic, very what do they call, lettered individuals on your show, and I'm an idiot who came to this very late in life.
Well, then you're in good company.
But I think one of the things that was interesting is that the honest reflection has sort of gotten me quite far, at least through in the analysis of what I didn't know. As in I knew I couldn't be persuaded by things that felt comforting, and that felt somehow insufficient to me naturally. And I suspect this is a slight tangent, but there's an interesting thing, which is, if you've ever done your DNA, there's 23andMe, and you can have your DNA sequenced, and they tell you lots of weird things about you based on your DNA. And one of the things I came across relatively recently was that they said I have a propensity for public speaking, which is, I don't have the gene in me that creates the anxiety around public speaking. Okay. And I thought, well, what a remarkable thing to be genetically have a predisposition towards, is a fear of or a comfort with public speaking. And so it generally occurs to me that there probably are people for whom things like being comfortable with accepting something that's comforting might be more persuasive to them naturally. Biologically, their brains might be just more willing to go with that. And sort of similarly, all sorts of things. There was I have a hypothesis that maybe there's a genetic predisposition towards engaging with counterfactuals or hypotheses. I think it was it Plato that said something, the sign of an educated mind is to be able to conceive of an idea, or to contemplate an idea without adopting it or something. And
very similar to that. Yep.
Yeah. So, and like that worries me that, he even noticed the fact that there was, this group of people that seem to, the moment they're exposed to something, either they have to react in violent opposition to it because to contemplate it any further might risk them adopting it accidentally, or would adopt it merely by hearing it. But in any case, that long preamble to go ahead.
so that's interesting because I've had conversations, and I remember years ago when there was about a bunch of rhetoric that was coming out, and I know this gets into the political side, but it's just a type of rhetoric that reminded me of this. Obama was reading a book that was of some Muslim nature or something, and he had it in his hand, and Fox got a picture of it while he was walking to an airplane that he was reading it. And there was this, that he reads this, that, and the other. And whenever he spoke on the subject, he addressed it. He said that I can read all types of things that I don't agree with. Right?
You mean Barack Hussein Obama?
Right. Right. But that's the whole point, is that the ideal that people think, if he reads this book at all, like I've read the Quran, and if someone looks at me and says, he's read the Quran, he must be invested in this, that, and the other. It's okay to read these things and understand these points of view without accepting them, and I think people have a problem with that. A lot of people do.
And I think it's again, the reason I mentioned that this sort of strangeness of the public speaking genetic predisposition is that, there is a fallacy of equivalent experience that I think exists in the world, as in we believe we are more similar on the inside than we likely are. I think, as somebody who has relatively recently discovered that I have a thing called aphantasia, which means that I can't produce mental imagery. And it's a relatively recently rediscovered phenomena. I've forgotten the name of the gentleman who discovered it. But it's this complete. When people talk about the concept of creating mental image, by the way, this is all your chat will talk about. Quite oftentimes when I mention this is all everybody wants to talk about. But in any case, when I say picture something in your head, that to me is analogous to say think about this concept. I can't actually picture anything in my head. I don't see images. I can't imagine. I can't picture my wife's face, even though I saw her just an hour ago. I have no capacity to conjure this up. Now, interestingly, I didn't learn this about myself. I learned this about everybody else, that apparently all of you guys are hallucinating all the time and able to conjure up some kind of TV screen in your head through which you can experience imagery, which I apparently don't have the capacity for. But in any case, the reason for this nonsensical preamble was just the idea that we are very much having different experiences internally, and yet we all seem very similar on the outside, So I suspect for some people, in any case, it is probably more maybe comfortable for them accepting propositions on the comfort level alone and not. And so this idea of intellectual honesty, I wonder if it's more than just a philosophical, but perhaps even a mechanistic disposition a biological predisposition that we have.
Yeah, and maybe even if it's not biological, it could still be mechanistic, and it could be something that maybe we learned at a young age, and now we have the propensity for that others might not have a propensity for.
Absolutely. But certainly I have it, whatever it is in me that is not satisfied by comforting falsities. I definitely didn't. I knew I didn't have that, and I think the new atheism movement, for much that it's maligned these days, I suspect. I think to some extent it awoke in me an awareness of the existence of sort of a wider philosophical thought. I couldn't be religious. I knew that wasn't in me to be religious. I couldn't find any reason to be so. And then there was this sort of dangerous book. I remember the God Delusion being published in 2000. I want to say 11, but that sounds so recent now. I don't know. Time's a weird thing these days. Yeah. The God Delusion was published, and all of a sudden we were in a position where there was another dangerous book that everybody was talking about. And I thought, well, what's so dangerous about this damn book? Like what does it mean for it to be a dangerous book? And I felt like as an atheist, I was relatively safe in reading this terrifyingly dangerous book and found it full of mostly reasonable statements about things. But it also mentioned lots of other things, philosophers and ideas. And it led me to Hitchens, and Hitchens, talked about a lot of other authors and philosophers, and not that he was a philosopher at all, but he spoke a lot about them eloquently and charmingly and entertainingly, and Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, etc. And then later, rediscovering just a genuine passion in me for engaging in philosophy and reading the literature. So certainly not an academic basis, but the person I immediately resonated with was Bertrand Russell. Well, there were two big things for me. One was the saying, the Socrates, paraphrasing Socrates,
I know nothing at all.
Yeah, true knowledge is knowing you know nothing. And I thought, right. That's okay. Well, that's good. That's the first time somebody that's respected has said that's a reasonable starting point. It's not irrational to be in that position as a starting point. Saying that you know something is the dangerous position in some ways. Like a claim to true knowledge, is a very difficult thing. And then, of course, Bertrand Russell sort of, many years later will say, the foolish are so certain and the wise are never sure. And it's like, well, that's an interesting point. That's worth hearing.
So While we're on that, I wanted to mention a correction of that, hopefully for the record here, on how it was actually said, because there's so many misquotes on it. It's the fundamental cause of trouble is that the modern world in the modern world is the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt.
He actually said it multiple times and has
Okay,
said
it was printed multiple times. That was in the San Francisco Examiner. It's when that one came out in 1933. So he said that on an interview, and it came out. And what's interesting about that is a lot of people think that's related to religion, but it actually wasn't related to religion. It was related to the fascist movement that was going on. And in that same year, earlier that year, like the rise of fascism became a thing. In 1933 is when Hitler came to power and everything. So that's what he was primarily referring to in that quote.
But I think a universal aphorism, if ever I saw one. I think
absolutely.
It's a valiant and a vital thing to remember, I suspect. So you've got Socrates saying, well, not saying, but obviously there's a whole thing about the oracles of Delphi and him wandering around trying to find, being. I'm sure your audience knows the story, but in any case, he recognizes that the reason he's the smartest man in all of Greece is that he's the only one that knows he doesn't know anything, and that's emancipating as somebody who's like confused about this very complex and academic world of philosophy, to realize that, okay, we can start from this position of saying, hey, we don't know anything, which is great, good start, and then the advocation that Russell brings about certainty being inherently a point of concern, I think is great. So I love that. Recently, have you seen the film Conclave? It's based on a book by Robert Harris, who I don't believe is religious, or at least is certainly not Catholic, but he wrote a book which became a movie called Conclave, which I watched recently, which is about a sort of a murder mystery, sort of suspense thriller set at a time where they're trying to decide on the next pope. So it's all about the Vatican and all about sort of machinations of power and sort of navigation of all of this. And Ralph Fiennes fantastically stands there and does a great job of delivering this very powerful speech at the beginning to the people in the Vatican. I'm sure they have a better title, I don't know, but in any case, he talks about certainty in that speech, and he's sort of talking about the plurality of opinions that exist within the Catholic Church and within the Vatican itself, and the different factions and different ideals. And he says that certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's very good. as a recent example of this sort of guard against certainty, guard against those that say they know for sure. Those are the things. It was one of the things Christopher Hitchens was very good about. He didn't like it. He thought it felt uncomfortable and smelly to him. And
I don't remember the name of the priest or bishop, but there was someone in the Catholic Church fairly early on when Galileo put forth this proposition that said that I think the term was certainty. He said that we are as certain that the sun spins around the earth as we are of the virgin birth. And I thought it was just such. I'll have to look it up and see who it was. If anyone in side chat knows who it was that made this, it's now when we look at it, it's hilarious. It's hilarious because
it's an early example of a sick burn, I believe.
Right. But this is the level of certainty that we're talking about, that certain things are a certain way, and it's a very fanatic and fundamentalist approach that it can't be any other way, and they're very closed to that.
So I think an absence of certainty leads to a necessary epistemic humility, right? There's a sense to which we can't be certain about things, and I think that's a great position to start from. Whenever whatever it is that we're going to discover, starting from a position whereby we recognize our own inability to have certainty and to suspect and be suspicious of those who proclaim to have it. I think especially is vitally important. And I think, to be fair, like, I think a lot of religious people will express an absence of certainty.
Yeah.
That certainly does happen. I think Dawkins talked about this. He talked about the idea that there was more likely to be the case that there would be atheists that would be it was less likely that an atheist would proclaim certainty about the absence of the existence of God than a religious person saying there certainly was a God. And that I also think is true. I do think that religion has that sort of challenge. There are some atheists that will say that they know for sure.
Yes,
I think those atheists are, I suspect, wrong, or at least are playing
methodologically wrong.
or are playing word games, and so which brings me to Wittgenstein, because you recommended a book on certainty by Wittgenstein, which I now have spent several weeks now, I think, since we started talking about it, having ambiently trying to find a copy of in the UK, but it turns out it's just not available. Or at least, well, there is now a copy, but it's very hard to get hold of. Even a particularly recent publication of Wittgenstein's Uncertainty is difficult to get hold of, which is a worry, even from university libraries, which is a worrying thing, I suspect.
Internet Archive, man, that's where you gotta go.
Yes, exactly. There are versions online, but in any case, yes, certainty runs afoul oftentimes of word games and language games, and the expression of certainty is a sort of a means of persuasion more often than it is actually a philosophical position, I suspect. I'm certainly a skeptical. Sorry.
Skeptical of Antangelo's position. That was something that was said earlier. We may very well have some people that are going to come in eventually on either side of the fence for the conversation. So
sure,
that'll be good.
I'm not sure where, other than that certainty is not a valid. I think that is that is a position I would hold as right. True. Now, the challenge is always, are you certain that that's true? And of course, I have to proclaim that I'm not certain that it's true. That certainty is not available. But I think philosophical certainty is very difficult to attain. I am a fallibilist, I've learned. I didn't realize I was, but I think I've always been a fallibilist. I think critical rationalism is the primary tool by which we build our models, our ideas of the world. And model building, I think, I had a big thing for a while about the idea of building models. Rather than saying I know something, I have a model, I have an idea of it, a representation of it in my head. And it was relatively a couple of years ago, I think, our friend Stephen Parton was explaining the free energy principle to me, which I'd only ever come across as an example of an incredibly complicated theory. And so I was trying to ask him, what exactly is it that's so complicated about this free energy principle theory? And he explains it to me very well in terms of, because the basic principle isn't that complicated, but the mathematical basis of it, the model behind it, is insanely complicated. So it's this kind of very, very sort of strange juxtaposition between a very simplistic concept and a very sophisticated idea, a bit like sort of relativity. The idea is quite simple. The maths behind it is fucking mind-boggling, if you pardon my French. But in any case, the free energy principle suggests that our brains are basically machines that are designed to construct models of our environments to reduce the existence of surprise. And I thought, well, that's a wonderful. Firstly, surprise surprised me as a word to use there, because you kind of assume that your brains are seeking truth, but then you realize, of course, truth isn't a territory that we have access to. We don't navigate the world of truth. We build models in order to reduce surprise. And the free energy principle is a description of how our brains mechanically sort of are involved in this activity. And I think that is a wonderful way of looking at this. I think this idea of building models, reducing surprise. If you come across surprise, you need to update your model. And that's all we have. We have models. We have ideas about how things are, which will either come into conflict with reality in some way and induce surprise, or be considered sufficiently valid for the moment that we haven't encountered surprise yet. And that's it. That's the whole game.
Yeah. You were mentioning something about certainty earlier, and there's this game that's always played. And I've talked with Travis Pangburn from Pangburn's channel. And Travis has this saying that certainty is almost certainly unacquirable. And it has a correction inside of it that kind of deals with, yes, we can't be certain about certainty. I don't generally use certainty as a term that means that we can know thing in some definitive sense. I think of it as more of a scale, like that you can think of things in levels of certainty. Otherwise, certainty, if it just means the finality of absolute knowledge, that like you absolutely know it, then if we can't know it, then the word, it just doesn't represent. There's not a corresponding thing that matches with the word, if that makes sense.
This is why we run afoul of the language games. So there was a chap, I forgot the name of the chap, he came up with this theory called speech act theory, which talks about the idea that language is played on these three sort of paradigms, but predominantly they are illocution, perlocution, and another one I've forgotten. And I forget the exact demarcation of these terms, but they're not very common. But in any case, the principle is that we use certain language. The principle is that there's an effect that we want to have in the world, and then we choose the words that we we put into service of achieving that goal, that change in the world. And then there's also the impact that has on the person listening to it. So there's three parts of speech. There's a performative use of language that's designed to have an impact. There's the intention of that impact, what I want to have happen, and then there's what's being perceived by the person listening to it. And those three things are always at play in language utterances. And mostly when we say something like, I'm certain it's raining outside, right? We're not talking in the domain of philosophical certainty. We're not talking about epistemic certainty. We're literally talking in the domain of wanting to convey to somebody that I would consider them a bloody fool if they didn't take an umbrella, out after I've expressed this very certain position to them, right? I'm to some extent I'm expressing overconfidence in order to convey urgency and an insistence upon this position. Sure. We don't, and this is half the problem with an awful lot of communication these days, is that we spend our times playing these language games where we pretend sometimes that either language is philosophically sound as a tool for conveying philosophy, which it isn't, or we pretend that language means nothing and that your words have no concept, or we're in infinite redefinition space, a la Jordan Peterson, for example. And these are both foolish. We have to recognize that language is used for persuasion. It's used to convey an intent to change the world. So me saying this right now is my intention is mostly to convey what my ideas of this stuff to you and have you know them in some way so that we can continue this conversation. But I'm also aware that we're streaming, so I might be using slightly more flowery prose or more elegant. Sure. I'm not. I know I'm not, but I could be using more flowery prose in order to convey a sense of confidence in you that I know what I'm talking about. So if this is just a game that we play, and I suspect if I had gotten a hold of uncertainty, I suspect Wittgenstein would be talking about language games all day in this regard.
Yeah, he does a fair amount. But so what's going on? It seems like we have some sentiment first. We have some sentiment, concept, ideal, however you want to couch that. And then we try to find a word that represents that sentiment. And the truth be told, there may not be a proper word that represents that sentiment exactly. So we have this kind of continuous flow of thoughts and sentiments that we have going on. And we're just trying to find a corresponding word that will align with that. And the reality is there may not be a perfect word to align with that. And we may pick some perhaps bad ones.
Well, language. So there's an interesting, you're familiar with the term linguistic drift?
Yeah.
So for anybody that's not aware, that there's a great example in the idea of the word soon. Traditionally used to mean immediately. Mm-hmm. Soon meant what we would now say is right now, immediate. But of course, because of human nature, we would say I'll do something soon, meaning right now, and then put it off. Sure. and over time, soon became to mean within the next few hours. Now soon might mean sometime in the next few weeks, right? But it used to mean that soon was immediate, and now we would say, well, we have the word now, that means immediate, right? Only now sort of tends to mean maybe in the next 10, 15 hour or so minutes. I'll do it at some point in the relatively near future. And we have to say right now if we mean to do something immediately. I mean, pretty soon that will probably drift away. And so language and human nature come into conflict here. We use language to convey a sense of what we mean truthfully, like what we mean precisely, but then human nature comes into conflict with that. And so I think the word certainty moves from something that was presentative of some kind of philosophical position, which is, I think, arguably unattainable, and it's just mean actually strong conviction or at least a desire to pretend or portray strong conviction about a proposition. So yes. Yeah,
we have there's a lot of words that have done this, and actually I think the word that you're referring to has a Greek version that had drift also, and this has been a conversation among some scholars specifically about the translation of at hand. So there's these ideas that Jesus is coming back, or that the end is at hand, and this terminology, many of the philosophers think that the term originally meant within arm's reach, that it is so close that you can reach and grab it. And so it's slowly but surely drifted into it's coming soon. It's coming soon. So I think that drifted in the Greek as well. But there's another interesting word that we use now that is rest. and we say we think of rest as needing to rejuvenate or to get energy back. But originally, the word rest just meant for motion to stop. Right. And then what happened is Shakespeare wound up using it in some of his to have a connotation of they stopped because they were weary or tired. So now we use the word rest and it has a connotation of tired. So when we have some atheists or agnostics that'll argue against why would God need rest? Well, originally the word had no connotation of energy. It was just about stopping.
Litigating language in this way is just a foolish endeavor. Absolutely. Especially historical texts that have been translated at a point in significant history from texts that were written even further in significant history. The Quran is written in ancient Arabic, mostly is absent an awful lot of the character representations that make it clear in modern Arabic. As we all know, the Bible's written in English, as most Americans will tell you. I don't know what to say. It's hard to be certain is what I would say. Hard to be certain about any of this.
Sure.
I think this is, I mean, to return to the point of certainty a little bit, though, there is a problem with this abandonment of certainty, which is, I think some people are saying, well, then that means my position's equally valid. All positions are equally valid. If you can't know that for sure, then all positions are equally valid. And I think that's an interesting problem, because ultimately that's not true. Not all positions are not equally valid. All positions are not equally invalid either. There are some positions that seem to be more valid than others. And so the question becomes, what makes a position valid? And then that's when we get into critical reflection, critical rationalism, philosophical skepticism, fallibilism. We build on these tools of what essentially has been codified into science as means to acquire knowledge, right? And I think this starts with the position of saying, "Oh, we can't know anything for sure," and it starts saying, "Well, what can we make a reasonable assessment at? How do we build these models of our reality, right?" And I think this is so the endeavor is not to convince people that you're more certain than they are as regards to what's true, but that you're more able to justify your position. And that's the game that we should be playing more often.
Yeah, that's interesting. Whenever I came out of church, when I first came out of church, I had this a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that I wanted to kind of argue with everybody. And I've looking back now, it was more about that I thought my position was defensible and everyone else kind of laughed it off, especially in religious circles, as how ridiculous. How can you not believe this thing? And mine was more so digging my heels in under, this is not an illogical conclusion to come to, that you shouldn't believe this thing if you don't have evidence. And so there was this, I don't know, this bullheadedness, this pigheadedness about, like, I need to represent that there's validity inside of this position, whether you understand it or not. So maybe that was some of my early projection.
Well, Dawkins is quite, again, often maligned these days. Not fashionable to bring him up, but in any case, Dawkins, I think, was quite good at this. He talked about this idea of, why is it the case that we would have a religious impulse in us? And it's certainly true to some extent that if I was a child of my parents were atheists. My whole life I've been an atheist. I've never had to emancipate myself from a religious mindset. If my parents had been religious, however, I would have likely believed it. It would be foolish of you not to. And in fact, it would be unlikely that you would be of a mindset to do so. If you're the sort of child that needs to do all your own science and experiment and figure things out for yourself, when your parents tell you not to stick the metal fork into the electrical outlet, right, and you do your own science on that, you're likely to not do very well, right? Those kids take themselves out of the gene pool fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So this idea that you believe something because your peers tell you it's true, that everybody around you says it's true, isn't inherently an invalid position to hold, right? There is a rationality to that, right? Which is partly why a lot of these religious institutions and sort of movements, social movements and groups that really want to keep their members inside, it's why they want you to stay inside and not talk to anybody else. They want to surround you with a space of truth, which is compelling and to some extent justifiably so. So the idea that all of the people around you were so convinced of the truth of their beliefs and so dismissive of your arguments. They're not dealing with the domain of arguments. They're dealing with social proof, right? They're dealing with socially reinforced conviction. That's how they got to where they were. So yes, I can understand why it would be difficult for those sorts of people to then change to a different mode of evidentiary requirement. Right now, you're saying, "Hey, you need to explain to me why my reason's wrong here."
Yeah. I think sometimes people hold positions that maybe they don't truly know why they hold the positions. They justify them in a different way, but it's not actually why they hold the position. That maybe it's for emotional salience or other things, and they logicalize it or kind of try to justify it for a totally different reason.
One of the most beautiful things recently has been the flat Earth movement. I think it's fantastic. The flat Earth movement is wonderful because, like, ultimately, what does that do? It shows you that most people have never really thought about it, and if they're encouraged to thought about it, they don't really know why. And if you just poke the holes in the right places, you can say, well, how do you really know? What if NASA was lying to you? I mean, that's a big what if, right? But what if NASA was lying to you? Right. How do you really know about the shape of it? Doesn't that look flat to you when you look at the horizon?
Sure.
Yada yada yada. So fair enough. Do your own science. What the other thing I love about the flat Earth movement is they keep rediscovering why the Earth is round, which is wonderful. Yeah, they keep doing these fantastic scientific experiments and justifying to everybody that the Earth is in fact round, which is great. But in any case, I get it. I get why they might find themselves in that position because it goes unchallenged. The Earth is a globe. It goes unchallenged. But do you really know it's unchallenged? How do you know it's unchallenged? Really? How do you know the Earth is a globe? And many people are suddenly caught off on the back foot. Oh, I don't know. I've always been told that. Right. Is that a good reason to believe something? Well, maybe not. So how do you do your own science on that? I mean, there are ways actually to do your own science on that, but you've never done that. Very many people have never done that because nobody was really arguing with this point. And so it's sort of caught people on the back foot. And I think the same thing happens when people suddenly start asking questions about rationality in the domain of religious discourse, because now all of a sudden, a group of people that have never really had to argue for the position have just been told by somebody that their ideas are wrong somehow. And it's like, what do you mean that's wrong? Like, how? So to some extent, you're a flat earther in their globe earth community saying, like, have you ever done your own research? And it's like, you are a crazy guy, like, why are you swimming against the stream like this? This is weird.
Yeah, that's an interesting subject. That's an interesting subject. I think more people, if more people in our society knew the good scientific reasons for why we believe that it's a sphere, that area and that cultivation that they were able to grow in wouldn't have been so ripe. But what happens instead is when they push against somebody that says, no, it's a globe, they say, well, why do you believe that? And the people don't have a good answer. And now this is a area that is ripe for growth in
it's getting worse because as science pushes the boundaries ever further in a sort of spherical frontier, the distances between the various points on that frontier become even further from the common experience of humanity, right? We talk about, you've only got to listen to literally anybody talk about quantum physics for 10 minutes who clearly knows. Was it Carl Sagan? Was it Sagan who said that if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics? The idea that these people are speaking...
I thought it was Feynman.
Was it Feynman? Sorry, not Sagan, Feynman. Yeah. Absolutely, yes. Yep. You listen to these people talking about quantum physics, especially when they are invoking it to justify some absurd half-assed theory that they've come up with yesterday. And they think it's just the best thing in the world, but they go, oh yeah, but quantum physics says. It's like, you don't know that. I know I don't understand that. I know for sure you don't understand that. And yet, but this is the problem. The sort of boundary of what is knowable or what is known by some people now has become so far away from the common experience that to some extent there is a sort of trust me bro from science coming. There is an argument from authority coming downstream. And that's a potentially dangerous thing because, of course, that means that potentially somebody can say, well, this is just science, so you should do it. And it's also potentially scary because at some point, there's going to be like a flat earth, the flat earth thing is going to keep happening again and again and again with different areas. At some point, like one thing I like to point out to people that claim a lot of wooey stuff about quantum physics is that we literally rely on quantum mechanics to operate computers. Your desktop computer is relying upon quantum mechanics right now in order to operate the way it's operating. And it's like, do you understand that? No, I don't understand that. electricity, by the way, is magic. Why is electricity not magic? Like, just the concept of electricity, we take it for granted. But like, honestly, every depiction in literature and in fantasies of magic is indistinguishable from electricity to me, right?
Sure.
I can hold this black glass thing, this black glass thin slate.
Yeah.
And then through the magical power of electricity, I can talk to my wife in Japan when she's over there through that on that little magic because of electric magic. Why is electricity not magic? Honestly, because we're used to it, because we think we understand how it works. And I guarantee you, most people, I don't know how that thing works. Very few people on the planet probably know fully how every part of that thing works.
I am very thankful for my dad that whenever I was young and I first wanted to drive the car, he had this whole thing that I needed to explain to him how the car cranks, what's making it go and whatnot. And before I could drive, so I was 16 years old. Oh no, I'm ready to drive. No, you need to understand. And I was like, I can't explain that. I need to try to figure it out. And at the time, internet wasn't heavily prevalent. So there's like, there's a few of these books, these maintenance repair books and whatnot. And I'm trying to figure out like, how does all of this work so that I can give a basic explanation of how it works, that it's not magic whenever I turn the key, that all of this is working in a certain way. So I'm very thankful for my father that he made sure that I had to explain that before I operate this vehicle.
That's good. That's very good. But the problem is only getting worse. So there was a chap called Matt Ridley who wrote a book called The Rational Optimist, and he describes in the introduction to that book how that he has on his desk two things. One is a Neolithic hand axe, and the other is a cheap laser mouse. And the Neolithic hand axe is made from one material. It's essentially a stone that's sharpened to one end.
Yep.
And it would have taken the person that made that a long time to make it. And the person who made it was the owner of it. And it was probably the most valuable thing that person owned. And he would have used it constantly. And it was utterly irreplaceable for him or her, presumably him. In any case, this hand axe fit perfectly into the human hand. And analogously, his cheap $5 bargain bucket laser mouse also fit the exact same shape of his hand. Yeah. Only the level of sophistication in that device is just insane. And sure. You say, well, okay, it's just a laser pointer. Okay, you make how do you make a laser pointer? How do you get the materials out of the ground to make a laser pointer? How do you make the plastic housing? How do you make the circuitry? How do you write the software? How do you build the computer interface system? Like, honestly, there are probably not very many people. In fact, I don't even think there's anybody probably in the world that from base materials to the laser mouse could make that. We're building on the shoulders of giants, in terms of, but it also means that individual humans are never going to understand all there is to know. We can't. Yep. So to some extent, there is a sort of necessary argument from authority having to come from science, and that makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and it will only get worse.
It will only get worse. It can't, because all of the information that is now being used in day-to-day activity, we're talking about microchips and everything else, or how artificial intelligence is programmed. Like, some of this is like, there's no one person. It used to be that all of the individual fields that can build a thing, no one person could understand the individual fields. Now there is a field itself that not one person can understand that entire field itself. It's multiple people that need to be involved in understanding that field. So yeah, it will only get worse.
Academics are increasingly narrowing in terms of what they learn. Like, it used to be, I'm a physicist, I understand physics. There's no physicist on the planet will say, I understand physics. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about the precision of certainty, there's the often misquoted or misrepresented Dunning-Kruger curve, which is there's the amount stupid and everything. But the interesting thing about the back end of that propositional curve is that the more you know about a subject, the less you're willing to commit to saying is certainly true. Yeah. As in, an expression of uncertainty is a strong indicator of somebody who's intellectually rigorous and actually knowledgeable about a field. You ask an idiot something, and they'll say, well, science says, right? You ask an actual scientist in that field, and they'll say, Well, at the moment, within a degree of probability, we've run some experiments that seem to indicate a certain level of uncertainty that at the moment we feel that kind of this is moving in a direction where our models might be predicting that something along the lines of this and that are going to, and that's how because that's the domain because they don't want to say this causes, I mean, how many times have you seen coffee either cures or causes cancer for sure in national headlines? I mean, this is just absurd, right? There's this idea of constantly.
Well, the best example that I love on this Dunning-Kruger one was a NASCAR one that you ask NASCAR fans, do you know everything there is about racing? And so many of the fans will say yes. And then you go through and you ask the NASCAR drivers, do you know everything there is about racing? And they're like, no. And like to see the contrast that the fans think they do, but the drivers are like, definitely not. You know, that's crazy.
My wife teaches Japanese, and her, what we talk about language quite often, and the question about when students are learning a language, they hit that point very early on where they're very confident that they've really starting to know a lot of Japanese words. Yeah. And they absolutely, you can hear them reach Mount Stupid and then fall down the valley of despair, where they suddenly go, I don't know if I can learn this language, because they've suddenly seen how complicated, you can say hello, you can say goodbye, you can rudimentarily introduce yourself. You think, oh, I'm getting this. How well do you know English? On a scale of 1 to 100, what percentage of English would you say you likely know? And yet somebody that has learned Japanese or French or German for like 3 weeks or something that seems to be getting a handle on it will probably say, oh, I'm like 90% there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that learn Koine Greek and they think they know Koine very well, and then they have to do the unisyle codices, which put all the words together that they don't have the end of a word, like it goes into the other word. So now you have to divide them out, and everybody that thought they knew, Koine, they start seeing unisyle Koine, and they're like, oh my god, I thought I knew this really well, but.
And that's it. You need to know enough about something in order to realize how much you don't know, and that's a very difficult thing for people to realize. So again, this is why certainty is usually a strong indicator of somebody who doesn't really know what they're talking about. This is which is kind of, there was a movement. It was probably around COVID actually, which was maybe it was reignited around COVID. I think it came before, but the idea was that they wanted scientists to start talking in more absolute terms. They didn't want to say something was like 95% effective. They wanted to say it was 100% effective because they wanted science to start communicating in the more sort of human, esoteric, not esoteric, the absence of esoteric, the more colloquial terminology, the way they would use language. So this will cure this, and it's a mistake. It absolutely shouldn't happen. Like there's no way, because if you say something's 100% effective and then one person doesn't get cured by it, then all of a sudden all of science is a lie right now. So we absolutely can't make that mistake. But I kind of understood where it was coming from. There's a sense to which you need to be persuasive more than you need to be accurate sometimes. And it's that tension between the desire for persuasion and the desire for scientific or intellectual rigor, I think that's at the heart of this problem of certainty.
We got a few minutes left before we wind up opening it up to guests. I did want to change the gears a little bit and ask you, can uncertainty be a moral virtue? And because we've just been talking about this in terms of epistemology and like whether we know something or not, but it seems like the subject of morality really comes into the certainty as well. And can you see certainty being a moral problem, and in what way?
Well, I think people will hear that. You might say, well, okay, if certainty is not a morally virtuous thing, then is perpetual uncertainty a morally virtuous thing? And I think that's sort of a dangerous, counterweight. Clearly, somebody who is perpetually uncertain is unable to act in the world, is unable to make clear decisions, and because we don't have certainty, we're in this problem of never being able to act in the world in some meaningful way. So the truth is, we want people who have a justifiable confidence that they're holding, that are willing to let go of that confidence the moment there's some counter information that's presented to them, something that goes against their reasoning. The moment they're shown that their reasoning is wrong, they should drop it. I think that the oft-cited position is strong positions held lightly, right? You want somebody who's confident but not certain, and willing to drop that confidence immediately the moment there's something that should justifiably change their position. So that should be the virtue. So some people confuse high confidence with certainty. That's a mistake. Anybody saying this is certainly true and I could not possibly be wrong, that person should be suspected. And that's certainly not a virtuous position. Perpetual uncertainty isn't good either. We need to be able to share our models, share our understanding, and move forward on that basis with confidence.
A type of operational certainty, at least, if not completely certain. We have to operate with some degree of confidence, at least.
Justifiable confidence.
Yeah, sure.
Because you could be confidently wrong, and you could be confidently wrong for really bad reasons. So we need justifiable confidence. That's the key.
Sure.
I wasn't sure how you tied that into a moral virtue, though. Morality is an interesting topic in and of itself.
Well, the reason that I do is because obviously, we have three primary camps of it, and it seems like the two camps that are primarily arguing now is like this consequentialist camp and then the deontological camp, especially inside a religious side, that says no, that this is right, like definitively that this is right and this is wrong kind of thing. And then consequentialists kind of say, it's all about the consequence, but then we can't know the consequence of a given action. So what happens is it seems like somewhere there's like the golden mean is in the virtue ethics, that they say it's a balance between the two. Like there's certain things that we can know, we can act on those things. And I just think that the subject of certainty, does seem to be playing with, even if it's doing it from the epistemological side, it seems to be playing with moral decisions and the level of confidence that we have.
Well, I think certainty is often expressed as a means of persuasion more than a rational argument. The idea that I'm saying it's certainly true says it in many ways not even in many ways is obviously not an actual argument. It's just saying I'm staking my reputation on the fact that this is certainly true, right? Right. I'm hanging my hat on this position. It's not an argument. And actually, I think for urgent and important things, we should ask for the argument more than the conviction of the individual expressing the view, right? Like that's...
Yeah, but the thing is, like, some of them, they don't understand this alt problem. Like me and you may understand that there's a normative claim, and then there's, a factual claim. But many people, when they make claims about this is right or wrong, they think about it in terms of...
Hume's guillotine, yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing that's interesting about this is that I suspect moral injunctions are frequently just their assertions about the nature of things, what is, that are essentially deliberately obfuscated, right? They're deliberately hidden. I say do not do X, or X is wrong, right? Yeah. That is not a rational argument. That is just an assertion about the nature of something. The implication, however, and the usual underlying position is X is wrong because it leads to Y, and Y is something that will negatively impact or justifiably or measurably negatively impact some aspect of society that I care about. Ultimately, my view is that all moral injunctions are essentially expressions of self-interest, and they from that initial self-interest and through the interplay of game theory and social dynamics, we build these games on top of that self-interest, and we build these systems on top of self-interest that create these very complex moral spaces. And we say that there must be this moral thing in the world, and it's not. It's just a game that we play that sort of extends our own individualistic self-interest into a domain where there are more people playing sort of the game of social morality, and then religion comes along and says, no, we are the objective standard of what is right and wrong, etc., etc., etc. But ultimately, whenever we say something is right or wrong, there's a reason. Even the religious, right? This is wrong because God says it's wrong, right? And the implication is we shouldn't do what God says is wrong because it will negatively impact us, because we'll be burning in hell forever versus being in the best seat in heaven, right? This is the implication, right? And that's an actual statement of fact, right? That's a claim about what the nature of reality is. That's not So I'm not really a big fan of Hume's guillotine, to be honest. I've never really bought into it. I think it's a sort of fallacy, really. We pretend that morality, and again, it's a language game in my view, but we pretend that moral statements are in a different domain from the domain of facts, and it's just not true. We're just deliberately obfuscating this, because I could say to you, hey, let's say I've got a absolutely sweetest little old lady you can imagine. She's an absolute darling, a real sweetheart. Wouldn't hurt a fly, but she's a genuine Christian, and her pastor, her church have reinforced this idea that homosexuality is a sinful act. And then you've got a genuinely hateful, bigoted atheist who happens to be a huge right-wing, bigoted, violently aggressive, nasty, homophobic piece of shit, right? Okay, right. And you ask both of those two people, is homosexuality wrong? You've got absolute
two
agreement.
Different reasons. Yeah, you got absolute agreement, but two different reasons.
And that's the thing. Moral injunctions are designed to gain consensus more than they are to explore reasons. They deliberately hide the reasons, because if you put forward the reasons, you're not as able to get moral or social consensus around the position, right? So ultimately, we hide the reasons, we get the consensus. It doesn't matter why we're going to go ahead and set fire to this house or go to war with the next village or whatever. It's nobody. I'm not bothered why you're joining me in this effort. Just I want this done, right? So let's go do this, right? Yeah. So oftentimes I think there's an aspect of that kind of. Again, I'm sure Wittgenstein's word games come into play here as well, but the premise fundamentally, I think, is that the moral injunctions are just deliberately obscured. But just because they're deliberately obscured doesn't mean they're operating outside of a domain of claims about the nature of reality.
Yeah. Well, one more subject that I know we kind of ran through a few subjects a little long, but I wanted to mention this to you and what you thought about the ideal of certainty hindering education and growth. Do you think that once we kind of have an ideal that this thing is true, that this is just a stop point at which we no longer explore? Does it debilitate curiosity?
I think that only if it's presented as certain and immutable. I mean, like when you're a young kid and you're in science class, you'll learn that water boils at 100 degrees, right? And then you go to the next level of education, you learn it only boils at 100 degrees if it doesn't have any salt in it, it's pure water. And then you might go to a more advanced physics class and you realize, well, depending on the air pressure and potentially some other atmospheric conditions, it might 100 degrees more or less. This is the thing. It's like this is why mental models, I think, are really important, because the thing about a mental model is, for most people, it's sufficient to think that water boils at 100 degrees, right? That's a sufficiently useful mental model. It's never going to come into conflict with surprise, because even if they are operating at an odd atmospheric air pressure, and their water content is not 100% pure, they'll just turn their kettle on, and they're reasonably entitled to expect the fact that water is boiling at 100 degrees. So this is the genius, I think, of this idea that we build these models designed not to come into conflict with surprise. So providing it's not surprising you, that your water is now boiling at 105 or 108 degrees Celsius, it's surprising that you're not going to encounter that surprise. So your model's sufficient, right? You've got a rough idea about model, that's fine. So I think the idea that we say that anything is definitive seems foolish, and I think certainly from an education perspective, I would disagree with that idea. We shouldn't say that this is certainly true. We should say this is what we think at the moment. This is the best understanding that we have of this situation. That would be ideal for me. But then at the same time, I think endlessly confusing people about the idea that that these superficial models are not useful is also a mistake. It's perfectly fine. I don't drive, for example, so I've got no idea how a car works. Your knowledge of a car is much more sophisticated than mine, but I don't own a car, and therefore my absolutely very likely inaccurate model of how a car works is never going to come into conflict with the surprise of my car not working like I thought it should. But if I was a mechanic who had my mental model of how a car worked, I would be in real problems, right? So mechanics need a much more sophisticated mental model of how cars function. And I think that that's something that's worth educating people on, is that we build our models sufficient to our needs more than they do to absolute truth. Oh, I have lost your audio.
I'm sorry, I had myself muted. My apologies.
No,
we're reaching the end of the hour. We're going to put a link on there. It should now be pinned on the side on YouTube. Anyone's welcome to come in and have the conversation.
I would just like to broadly apologize to your audience for my mindless ramblings and lack of coherence.
No, I did want to clarify one thing, because we do have a primarily American audience. He is from the UK, so when he says at 100, he means Celsius. So I didn't want anybody to freak out like that. You're talking to a bunch of Americans here. You got to talk to them on their side of the numbers.
I can only apologize. If you will insist on using the worst form of temperature measurement, I don't know what I could do to help you. You know, there's like you and one other country that uses Fahrenheit still. It's baffling.
I didn't write our education books. I just know these people read them. Okay.
Before somebody says it, kilometers for the win. Okay. I'm not a miles person, so yeah, fair play on this.
Scott, how goes it, man?
It goes well. I'm really enjoying this conversation. In fact, I'm going to declare William Owen a skeptical atheist Zen master. He's made me think about things. It's surprising. It's like, I never thought about that before. And now I think the earth is flat. So,
mission accomplished. That's great. Thank you, Scott.
Always enjoy hearing from you, man. Thanks for stopping in. We got the chat open. Anything particularly that stood out to you, though?
Well, I'm thinking about the practical levels of skepticism. You know, how does a skeptic atheist who has a naturalistic or physicalist worldview speak to people who don't and convey accurately? And of course, I kind of want to convey skepticism to my grandchildren, which is probably kind of subversive because their parents are Christians. So it's just it's just kind of a quandary of how to play that language game. And so I'm thinking in terms of, and William is absolutely right about like what we tell children about boiling water, what we tell them about animals. Like if you see that snake, run. That was my first instinct. But then at some level, you need to teach kids. Okay, if it's a snake with a kind of a diamond shaped head, you run, but don't be afraid of the other ones that are just trying to eat bugs and live a life or whatever. Yeah. Same thing with skepticism. You want to teach kids to be appropriately skeptical, but they're kind of literalistic. So, how do you tune that down? So this is important stuff to deal with.
I think teaching kids and talking to kids is really, really important. And I think one thing about the word skepticism that we have to be careful of is people assume skepticism is permanent denial of everything all the time. And this is clearly a problem with either some disingenuous apologetics or occasionally just sort of misunderstanding of the idea of skepticism, right? Like the idea of permanent skepticism about all things in all times and in all places is really silly. So I think the best way to exemplify epistemic humility is to embody it, especially in front of kids. Be willing to say when you're wrong. There's a real problem with parenting, I suspect, where parents seem to want to parent from a position of infallibility, which is a very dangerous indicator to show. So to be able to show kids that it's okay to be wrong, to when kids say that they don't know, well, actually, not even when kids, none of this applies to just kids, with everybody. If somebody says I don't know, I love saying, hey, that's a great answer, that's fair enough, like to be allowing people to say I don't know, to make them feel that that's not failure, that's absolutely critical. I know that with kids, sometimes they will say, I don't know, when they really do. What they really mean to say is, I can't be bothered to think about this much. I'd rather play Xbox, right? But so there's a balancing act, right? But in any case, I think the idea of exemplifying epistemic humility, right? When they ask you something, like how do I do this, or why does this happen? And kids will definitely ask you things like this. The idea that you might go and say, hey, I don't actually know the answer, let's go find out, let's go read Wikipedia, let's go find an encyclopedia, let's find out together how that is, right? Because there are things that I don't know, right? And I think that exemplifying that behavior is probably more important than trying to teach them to be skeptical. Like to show them what skepticism is and why to value it, I think is perhaps more valuable.
There are also things to consider is like the emotional readiness of a child. Like when the weather gets bad, are we going to get hit by a tornado? No, we're not. Because if you start saying, well, it's possible, but we'll keep you safe or whatever, that's better. But then you've created this emotional turmoil that the kid can't necessarily handle. And so you also have to be asking the question, like I kind of scratched out in the side chat, do you need to give them confidence or do you need to give them technical accuracy? And when is it the right time to do that? So it's not easy being a skeptic. In some ways, it's a lot easier being a follower of dogma and doctrine, but because you have to answer some of these questions individually for yourself, and that's an uncomfortable position to be in.
Well, one thing for sure, it's not easy to be as a parent. I am not a parent, so I would take anything I have to say on this matter with a massive pinch of salt. But I think again, there are ways of conveying. I think threading the needle between telling them what's true without telling them something that's likely to upset them is the challenge, right? You want to be as honest as you can be, and say, but without necessarily putting them in a position where they can't trust you anymore. Well, if you say we're not going to be hit by the tornado, and then the tornado hits your house, that's a loss of confidence in parental authority right there. I think, and again, I am not a parent. I think the moment you're sleep deprived and frustrated, and you've got other things on, and there's a kid asking you absurd questions, I understand completely why sometimes we might reach for more convenient answers.
Positive but true assertions is what I go with.
I would say.
So I do stuff like with the storm, when I generally do stuff like this house has weathered many storms. This isn't its first.
Perfect.
Right.
Yes.
So it's a positive and true reinforcement. It's not to say that anything can't happen bad, but it does give a sense of, okay, this house has weathered many storms. It does give a sense of confidence.
Very good. I was in Japan. I spent a lot of time in Japan, and sometime I was in a house. Early on, it's kind of weird for me because living in England, we don't have earthquakes. I know you have them occasionally in the US, and you have quite severe weather in the US. But living in England, we don't have particularly damaging or severe weather. One of the comforting things, one of the few places where I felt comfortable was in the older houses. Because you have these really ancient houses that have been there for a couple of 100 years. You know pretty well, right, that house hasn't been knocked down by the many, no doubt, earthquakes that it's had to endure. So yes, that's a very good answer.
Want to welcome Robin on here. Robin, how's it going?
Hi, Robin.
Oh, it's going great. Well, this is a great guest, William. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I've appreciated much of what you've said. So.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Very kind.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier when you were first coming on, that there's different people with different academic backgrounds and all, but I think this subject right here with certainty is it's a subject that touches everybody. It has really little to do with academics. It has more to do with everybody has their moments of uncertainty, and they don't know whether they need to externally represent a sense of certainty or whether they need to play that down. So it's just something that on a day-to-day engagement that we have, whether we decide we're going to show that we're certain or whether we're going to show that it's true that we're uncertain, and that's okay.
I think certainty is also a weapon that's wielded against people that aren't sure. If I detect weakness in you, maybe you're not so confident in this position, I can project certainty and confidence. I know you're going to not be able to challenge my position. I'm going to look like I know more than everybody else, and I'm a hero. I think that this idea, especially in philosophy, is a weird space because fundamentally philosophy and philosophical ideas are just about human beings and human nature and the challenges of the human condition and the exploration of what it means to be wise and how that navigates the problem of the human condition. And I think that it should be a very emancipating kind of thing. Like we should all be participants. We all have a philosophy, whether we know it or not. We all construct an epistemology, whether we know it or not. We all have an ontology, whether we know it or not, whether we call it that or not. And yet the world of philosophy seems like a million miles away from real human beings. It seems like something people are doing on a mountain somewhere in ancient Greece, and that's the only place it ever happens. And this is the real absurd position. But it means that I think when people are starting to make inroads into philosophical inquiry and sort of understanding philosophy, as well as a lot of things in academia and science, I think it makes people very afraid, and it makes them susceptible if they're willing to say, I'm not sure. to the let's say the charlatans of the world that are willing to say, well, I know for definite, and now we're back to Bertrand Russell, right? The foolishness is certain and the wise are never sure. So I think remembering Bertrand Russell in that moment is a good a salve as you can have.
Yeah, sure. that kind of confidence that you're talking about that people project is kind of the number one arrow in the quiver of the gaslighter or the narcissist. People who get into relationships with narcissists are often attracted to their confidence. And then when reality sets in, there's something different. And of course, many a pastor, many a preacher has gotten people to come down the aisle and repent and donate money based on very confident statements about the Bible that weren't necessarily accurate. That confidence there. Now, I don't know if you discussed this because I was like 15 minutes late getting in, and then I had to step out a few times. Did you deal with the observations on the difference between statistical confidence and philosophical certainty or confidence in philosophy? How is that defined versus I kind of, just from college statistics, understand statistical levels of confidence or certainty, but how do philosophers define it and deal with it? Is it just the statistical part, or is there some other language game that we have to interact with?
What is that phrase that there's lies, damn lies, and statistics? The three.
Exactly. Yeah. I repeat that often.
The problem with statistics isn't really that the statistics lie. They may lie. They may be false statistics. They may not be accurately collected, but they normally just represent the truth that somebody hasn't really understood. And they usually ask the statistics an entirely different question to the one that statistics are attempting to answer. And that creates a real issue. I don't know. Statistical confidence evidence is evidence of a kind. I would applaud anybody saying, hey, there was a study done. Here's some statistics. This justifies my confidence in this position. That's a start. It's better than a "you trust me, bro" type argument, I guess. But we have to be careful. The interpretation of statistics is fraught with perils, I'd say.
Yeah. I want to introduce two more guests coming in here. Mike from Answers and Atheists and Simos. How's it going?
Hi, Simos. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Hey. We meet again, Simos.
Yes, indeed.
If you're a fan of Dapper Dino and you watch one of his most recent uploads, you will hear Mike feature prominently in some of the videos that are. It's kind of basically a 4-hour debunk on okay, what's his name? Standing for Truth.
Donnie Badinsky.
Donnie Badinsky. And except whenever they refer to speed of sound, that is Mike, because he changed the channel name to Answers and Atheism from Speed of Sound of Gravity. So if you do watch that video,
okay,
for Speed of Sound, because he figures prominently in some of those presentations.
Yeah, that whole raw mat debunk thing. I think what the hell was the name? Walking Fish. You remember him?
Yeah, just a Walking Fish. Yeah, he's a great guy. I miss him. He used to come on the channel a lot.
So we were in a chat on Donnie Badinsky's channel, and Raw Matt mentioned that paper that he had published, right, with the journal. And so we got Dapper Dino on, and while we were on that stream, Raw Matt went out and edited that document while we were talking live. And it was the funniest goddamn thing, because he realized that he was in some trouble, right? Because he had a copyright infringement.
And by the way, talk about two people who need to be much less certain. There's Raw Matt and Donnie Badinsky.
Yeah.
I call him Donnie Deals. Donnie Deals.
Yeah.
Because he's like a used car salesman.
I'm happy somebody finally fucking noticed me.
Well, I'm sure, William, that you're in great hands for a moment. I'm going to run to the restroom. Robin has mod and all.
Okay, certainty. Okay, the etymology of the word is settled, decided, fixed, sure, determined. and it refers to being beyond reasonable doubt, right? Like beyond a reasonable doubt, I have my hands on a newsprint pad right now, right? I mean, I can tell that, and I would be certain of that. And it seems like religion and philosophy have taken that word and they've tried to purify it and make it some sort of religious super thing, right? And that's where we get into trouble, because you can say, well, I mean, am I really certain that I have my hands on newsprint, right? And it's like, or what is newsprint, or isn't it mostly space between the atoms and all that bullshit? So I think taking some of these things a little too seriously is problematic. It would be my opinion.
Well, I think that's the reason why we shouldn't be certain about things. I mean, language fundamentally is a very imprecise tool, and but it is the main one we have for conveying our ideas to each other. It is and again, this is kind of like the water boiling thing, and why I like the idea of mental models, because ultimately we're not talking about absolute truths here. We're talking about reasonable levels of abstraction. We're talking about what is it reasonable to say. You could say I'm holding my iPad in my hand or something, or you could say that actually most of what I consider to be my iPad is in fact empty space, and the forces that control my iPad are not really a solid object, and what extent am I really in contact with them in any case? And but that's a level of precision that we don't frequently encounter, right? And so the denial that we talk about things in these different sort of modalities is the problem to begin with, right? We can use the word certainty to mean absolute epistemic truth, capital T truth sometimes referred to. We could do that if we want to, as long as we're all sharing in that useful definition, right? Then we can have a conversation about it. But also, it's perfectly reasonable to talk about certainty as strong conviction, as reasonable conviction, and use that tool in our language. It's when people equivocate between these two positions without making it clear that that's what's happening that we run into significant trouble. Or we get people like Jordan Peterson, as I say, who and endlessly redefines everything to mean anything he wants to, because he plays the language game to the point of absurdity. But in any case, yeah.
So it was either Robin or Big Bad Mama that said something the other day it was just said exactly right. They said, "I'm almost certain that certainty is impossible." Which is the right way to say it, right?
I don't think certainty is attainable, and I'm always asked, how can you be sure? And I said, well, I'm not. Then what else can you say at that point?
Was that you, Robin, that said that?
Now you're talking about some sort
It's
of
probably Robin.
It was, yeah.
Because people certainly have a feeling of certainty, justified or unjustified. There's this
feeling,
yeah. So when you say you can't have certainty, so you're talking about something different than the kind of the emotional confidence that some people feel. So I guess there's a difference.
Yeah, a perfectly adequate and viable way of using that term is to talk about the strength of feeling that you're having, an emotional response to a position. And that's a perfectly valid domain to use the word certainty in. But again, we just need to make sure that we're not moving between these modalities of language, because if we are and we're not calling it out, we end up saying some absurd thing. Nothing is better than a ham sandwich is better than nothing. Nothing is better than the ultimate world peace and for everybody and maximal well-being. Therefore, a ham sandwich is better than ultimate world peace and maximum well-being. Right? This is Bertrand Russell, I believe. And in any case, this is what happens when we make these false equivalencies and mix these modalities of language use. We end up being able to say completely absurd things. Language is not mathematics. That's why we invented mathematics.
Yeah, it's and I get it from Travis Painter. It's certainty is almost certainly unattainable. That's what.
Well, I like to phrase it like this. I think we either can't know or can't know that we know something that's true. As in, even if I knew a true thing, I couldn't know that I knew it. That's the problem that we have. It's not so much that we can't have certainty. It's just that how could I ever know that I knew a true thing? I can't. I can have a very high confidence in something.
Yeah.
And still be wrong.
The almost. Yeah, the almost is what throws it in there and gets you like.
Yes, of course,
Scott, I just want to remind you that cats disprove flat Earth. I don't know why y'all
cats disprove.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll
but they
get
would
that.
push
But
everything.
then, as we know from science, all cats are Nazis. So that's also on the.
Well, they would push everything off the edge. So
That's true. That's very true.
Right. I was trying to get the joke here. I appreciate you coming through
I
for
can't
it in
believe
the
you
end,
had not
Robin.
heard me say that before. That is my like.
No, I haven't.
That is like I'm almost certain that is true right there. Yes.
I love cats. Cats are awesome.
It was nice meeting you. I'm gonna jump down and let y'all talk. I'll listen. But
Thanks,
thank you.
Robin.
It was a good
Hey,
talk.
Robin,
Glad
thanks
to
for
hear
stopping
Nice
somebody
to
by.
talk.
see you, Robin.
Yeah, you too, Simos, Mike, Scott,
Is
Robert.
that a
You,
bass?
Oh, it's good to hear you, Robin.
I'm guessing. Is that a bass in the background, Simus?
No, that's a guitar.
Is that a Fender?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Oh, nice.
I think that's my Super Fender.
Super Fender.
Well, I've customized it to. I mean, I did
Oh.
it like 30 years ago.
Gotcha.
It's scalloped with a humbucker and a stacked humbucker at the.
Is that a little Les Paul clone in next to it?
That's a Les Paul clone. Yeah, absolutely. And I've got another one on the other side as well, which you can't
Nice.
see, which is an aria, which I haven't yet to scallop.
I wanted to say, Robin, that just poked out of here. She is actually pinned in the video description. She and Phyllis Sober have been a great supporter to help me grow, and they have spoke nothing but good of me that I have heard. So I appreciate both of them.
Poor judges of character, but long may it continue.
Yep. Any questions or anything that anyone has that's not in here, please just put them in the side chat. We'll try to address them. I think there was something of a cheeky joke that was dropped in here as a question earlier from Kurt. Question for Willow: does a rabbit have a philosophy and epistemology and an ontology?
Sure, I would say yeah, probably. I think most mammals will be able to I think most animals map their environment to some extent. I think they're probably better philosophers than most humans. I don't think they confuse the map for the territory nearly as much as humans do.
And most importantly, can they justify their grounding for their laws of logic and reason and certainty?
I don't know. My dog used to get fetch wrong quite a lot when I didn't actually throw the ball.
Yeah, I've got a cat that doesn't understand windows. He always goes
actually,
outside the window and he looks at me and it's like, wow, how does that work?
I meant to mention this before, and we were talking about children. Children are like perfect philosophers. I mean, they have absolutely no concern whatsoever about getting things wrong. They will say things. Yeah. They are not. There's no early on. There's no public awareness of this sort of reputational harm that being wrong might cause, and so they're happy to be wrong and then say, "Oh, I didn't know that," or learn something. In many ways, like I suspect animals and children are better philosophers than adults. We have to kind of relearn some of this stuff, I think.
Yeah.
Well, animals and children aren't confused by the fact that they have a brain and how the brain works. And I think most philosophers are confused about how the brain works. I don't know.
Well, philosophers talking about how the brain works is probably outside of their field of expertise.
The deal is that we're smart enough to do all of this abstraction, but we're not smart enough to understand what exactly that means. And that always bothers me. And we have to look at ourselves a little differently.
Well, that might be an interesting conversation because I sort of suspect to some extent the hard problem of consciousness might be a language game problem.
Yeah.
Most things are. Most things are.
Well,
I mean,
there's some danger there that we might dismiss something.
That's fair enough. But I mean, I disagree that children make excellent philosophers. I mean, I don't think they do. I've managed to beat several in debate quite badly, so they go home crying to their mums. Right?
Simos for the win, huh?
But there are a lot
I
of
take them where I get them.
There are a lot of 35-year-old YouTube streamer children, certainly. Yeah.
Well, there's that as well. But I just think that especially as we've come on a long way since the 17th century, these sciences have become much more unified amongst themselves in the language they use. Right, so the language is very specific to individual sciences now, where other sciences can hardly understand it, let alone the layman. And philosophy is, the most advanced of those. So, there's a lot of language in philosophy which just people don't understand. They don't know what the meanings are. They have specific meanings. I got them wrong the other day, like objective, subjective, right? So,
Oh
like
God,
people,
that's
people
just
think that that's to do with the mind, and then other people go, no, no, no. In philosophy, it's to do with stance. It's to do with the stance independent or not. And I just think, oh, okay, yeah, that's great. And then we were going through. Let me just say one example quickly, which I'm coming up to, which we're going to be talking about on the 21st, which is grounding. Right now, the way a theologian uses the word grounding is completely different to the way a philosopher uses the word grounding.
Yeah.
So,
the
go ahead, Will.
the subjective objective distinction, one of the problems that we have isn't really that people get these things confused painfully and constantly. That is the repercussion of the problem. The problem is the fact that we're never encouraged to understand this at school, that these things are never explained to children for the most part. We do very little philosophy at school. I remember spending a significant portion of my education, what little there was of it, I left school at 16, and I remember spending, however, like at least a year learning about the way that chloroform worked in leaves, which I promise you has been of absolutely zero use to me in my subsequent many years. And I spent absolutely no time at all learning about philosophy, learning about the idea of objective subjective and what that means, learning to think about thinking, learning metacognition, learning to learning about Bertrand Russell and it's not because, and this is the thing that really upsets me sometimes, is that there's an assumption that these things are complicated. Most of the really useful things that you could, the a priori first principles, like philosophy 101 stuff, it's very achievably graspable by a lot of people. It's not complicated. It is very much intuitive. Going back again to what we opened with about Russell, is he's very readable. For a late Victorian, the man wrote some clear prose, and it's very understandable and it's very relatable. I think the thing that makes me angry is that we aren't taught this as children, and were we to have done so, we would be able to have much more interesting conversations in later life and with more people. And sadly, we aren't, and so we can't.
Even when I was in college in the 80s. It was a business degree, and they didn't even try to teach business ethics. I had zero ethics, zero philosophical, none of the requirements, how you have your required level of studies and then your specialty or focus. We didn't even have to learn. I'm sure they remedied that in the 90s or 2000s or whatever, but yeah, not even a course in business ethics in college when I was taking.
Well, I think business ethics is an oxymoron, I suspect, but in any case,
I know. How do I justify what I'm going to do with it?
That's retrospective.
It's always been what business ethics.
I like that. Yeah. No, yeah.
I did a bit of philosophy, but it was in history class. It was learning about Greek culture. Basically.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
So that came in there, but I mean, that led me on to look at it myself. So I think a really good way that history of philosophy can be taught is through the history of philosophy. And I think maybe that's a really good place for children to be starting at, rather than actually going for we're going to teach you philosophy. Let's just teach you about the early thinkers and some of the ideas they came up with in their lives, and how there's a constant trail, like in classical music. Right? There's a constant trail of student-teacher relationships between the masters.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, I just want to say hi. Sound Epistemology, nice to see you. It's been a while. Good to see you, man. It's been too long, actually. Curious about Willow's stance on the role of confidence and certainty in critical I can't see the rest of that because it's off my screen.
Critical rationalism.
Yep. Yeah. Sound Epistemologies and I met in the street epistemology. Are you guys familiar with the street epistemology community?
Yes.
I think so.
Oh yeah.
So street epistemology was it was sort of, it's an odd thing in many ways. It was created originally by a chap called Peter Boghossian, who I'm not the biggest fan of. And I read his...
Yeah, he turned out to be a real stinker. I was a fan of him for just a little while, and then I just started hearing some stuff he was doing with some others, and I just thought, no.
He wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and that book I didn't resonate with at all. And I felt that if it was a manual for creating atheists, it was the sort of atheist I didn't want to be. And I kind of dismissed it. But subsequently to that, somebody else read the book, a chap called Anthony Magnabosco, who picked up the book and along with a group of others, basically took some of the ideas that Peter espoused in the book, namely this concept of street epistemology, the idea of going out there and encouraging people to engage in epistemological reflection, and basically turned it into a workable methodological approach to having these kinds of interviews, these kind of conversational tools. And one of the main techniques that they will employ in those is asking people, when they make a statement of something they believe to be true, that's important to their life, they'll not ask them, they'll not immediately start questioning them. One of the first things they'll do is say, well, how confident are you in this? So if you say, I believe in God, or I think the earth is flat, or I think this, and this, how confident are you? And one of the reasons why that's so powerful and useful is that it takes away the binary of the language. The binary of the language encourages people to say, well, this is true. And then you say, well, how confident are you? Well, 75. Well, hang on a second. That's a very different thing from this sort of previously asserted sort of or felt, conveyance of information, which is that you're almost 100% certain with complete conviction. But now we talk about the confidence scale. Now all of a sudden you're 75 or 30. It's become a bit of a sort of an in-joke within the SE community now that you don't constantly, anybody makes any statement. The next question is always how confident are you? A scale to 1 to 100. 0 to 100, sorry. But I think it's a useful tool in decoupling how we're using language from actual sense of internal conviction. Would recommend, or certainly would recommend the methodology, and indeed SE in principle I think has very many good things about it, even though I remain not a big fan of Mr. Boghossian.
Yeah, I've heard the term used, volume of confidence.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one that we have these different kind of volumes. Like where would we die on this hill, so to speak?
Sure.
And I think when we convey certain sentiments or certain ideas, we don't have a way inside of our vocabulary. It's just not structured. Our sentences aren't structured in a way that we convey the level or the volume of our conviction in that individual assertion. So instead, we say them in terms of they are true or they aren't true or so forth. We don't have any volume in them.
I forgot who it was. There's a quote that says, "A man can only speak in opinions," and that I forgot who said it, but that was, I think it might even been an American, believe it or not. But in any case, well said, whoever said it. And I think that's worth remembering. And the other thing, of course, I will say it's raining outside. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that I think I saw something a moment ago that appeared to, relate to an experience that I would consider to be raining. But that experience was informed by visual distortions in the atmosphere, presence of distortions in the glass that I think I was seeing. And, exactly. And if I was to convey this to you, then I'm not going to give you the usefully urgent information that you should probably get an umbrella. But at the same time, I'm necessarily forced into speaking in something that's less accurate and precise. But the trick is not to try to make people be more precise in their language. It's to recognize that people can't be precise in their language, and asking people for confidence scale answers is usually a good way of doing that.
Yeah. Well said. We got any more questions? Any more comments?
I wanted to reflect on something that you said much earlier, which was which relates to that what you just said about not trying to be, trying to appeal to confidence rather than how accurate the language is. And it's something which it's used to be a bugbear of mine in physics. Physicists would quite often use naming conventions incorrectly. They're very inconsistent with naming conventions, and also the idea is that they're also very lazy when it comes to naming things, because they maybe don't understand the full potential of what they're dealing with. And one example of this, I think, is models and theories and the difference between them.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
So, and it's just a bugbear of mine. So when you were saying, yeah, it's good to think in models this way, what you're referring to is not the sense that a physicist would use the word model or some physicists would use the word model. It's actually more of a mathematical idea of saying, look, we're going to use a representation which has some.
I'm still here. I don't know why my camera's just in.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to use a representation which has, we're just going to call the map, right? Effectively. And we're going to acknowledge that it's a map, and, the data points that connect the map to reality may be sparse or they may not be sparse, and that's going to be the level of confidence we have. Is that accurate?
My first I was listening to a guy called Shane Parrish, I believe, who runs a website ran a website called the Farnham Street Project, and I heard him on a podcast a while back talking about mental models. And mental models for him was a really exciting and interesting concept, and he loved mental models. He was talking about them frequently, and I heard this term mental models and got very excited because I thought I knew what he meant by that. And I later came to realize that I didn't know what he meant by that, but the thing I thought he meant by that was much more interesting, which tells you something about language. So colloquially, mental models are this idea of like a conceptual abstraction for something, a working understanding of something.
I use the word map because that's traditionally in philosophy how it's been referred to.
And then you've got these other models, which are much more sophisticated, actual abstractions that are being represented in either mathematics or physics, or just some construction of something that is suitably an analogous representation of something. And that's a very different idea. But when I heard...
Well, when you say an analogy is a type of map, I just think, well, that's a map with a built-in flaw then.
Well, of course,
but it's an analogy, and all analogies are going to fail, right? Otherwise, they'd be the thing. So.
Alfred Belinsky says, I think, is it Basinski? I always get this guy's name wrong, but he came up with the term, the map is not the territory, right? And this is an urgent and important, it's one of those just beautifully useful things that sounds very superficially unhelpful until you realize how clever it is and how interesting it is, and how often we get those two things confused. So the map is not the territory is a very important injunction here. So the model is not the thing itself, and so anything that we learn about the model, we haven't necessarily learned about the thing. Depending on how good the model is, we may have learned something. But in any case, when I heard Shane Parrish talk about mental models, he was talking about these kinds of like useful sort of mental representations of how something might work in practice. Whereas I thought he was talking about literally worldviews. I thought he was talking about how we have a mental construction of how the world is. And we are constantly updating our mental representations of the world. And in many ways, it is the similar concept, but like it's a very importantly different idea. And this connected very much to Friston's free energy principle idea of we build these models to reduce surprise. And that's the game that human beings are playing. We are playing no other game, and we pretend we're playing the game of truth and reality, but we aren't. We only have experience. And we're building our models such that we can make predictions about the next level of experience in order for us to reduce surprise. If we encounter surprise, it means that our models, our internal models, our representations of how things are have come into conflict with reality in a way that is perhaps urgent and important for us to pay attention to. And that's why surprise is such an evocatively, alarming thing for us. Positive or negative, right? Like a positive surprise is just as bad. I mean, somebody talked about this idea of, if you think there's no food, there's no berries in the field next to you and you're a caveman, and you go out and you suddenly discover by accident there actually are berries there. That's a positive surprise, but it's still bad that you didn't know that food source was available to you there. So the idea is you need to update your model to reduce surprise. But interestingly, the concept of surprise comes into connection with this idea of resolution. I have bugger all knowledge about how a car works, but my obviously flawed, very likely flawed misunderstanding of how a car works never comes into conflict with reality, because I don't own a car. I don't need to know how a car works any better than I already do. So my model of a car's function is sufficient for my needs, such that it never comes into conflict with reality. But if I opened up a garage and I started operating as a mechanic, I'm going to be surprised all day and have an awful lot of very alarming and urgent signals that I need to update my models, right? So this is a beautiful, I think, and simple way of thinking about how we navigate the world that removes the dialogue of certainty and truth and necessary, because we're not in that space, both philosophically and in reality. We're just not in that space. We are building models of in order to make predictions that occasionally will or will not come into conflict with reality and induce surprise. And I think somewhere between Belinsky's map is not the territory and Friston's free energy principle, I think we've got a good path forward for knowing what knowledge really is.
Okay.
Yeah, we think we know what the world, quote unquote, looks like, but I would like to, if anybody wants to invest in it with me, open a museum called the Hall of Maps, and have all these. It would just be these walls of like the typical Mercator transition or whatever they call it for the typical map, that world map that you see, and then all the other useful but different maps of the same world and how the different continents look and what they're used for. And you'll realize that even our view of the world kind of depends on what you're trying to get out of it.
Oh, you're talking about different orthographic projections of the globe.
Yeah, the projection, Mercator projections and things, because, that would blow some minds if,
Yeah,
and you could
even the shape
add to that.
I do want to come back to William in a minute when you guys are done on what he was saying.
Yeah.
You could add how the map changed over a few 100 million years too, and as to what's going. Anyway, William, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that model thing is wonderful. I mean, I'm thinking about that. That's pretty cool. It kind of ties into my embodied cognition ideas, which are pretty cool. Anyway. Simos.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to push back on it a little bit because
Thank
because because that's what I do best, I guess. I don't know.
That's what I do.
Yeah. So, the idea, the concept is, I've got nothing against that, and I think the concept is well laid out in, even basic philosophy about using the word maps, right? Maps of something or another. What was the word? Maps of recognition or something like that, is it? I can't remember. There's a phrase that I read in SEP once about it. I can't remember. But either way, my pushback really is just when you're seconding the word model, right, which I think has got certainly has this, colloquial connotation. We think of like that Monty Python sketch. I don't know if you know the one where they're in the they're at school, and I think it might be in Ripping Yarns actually.
I do know what you mean. Yeah,
and they're in the modeling shop, and all the boys are building models, and then they turn around, and this guy has built a full scale icebreaker, and he goes, "You can't build that," and he goes, "But sir, I've used 25,000 tons of steel," and he goes, "No, you're going to have to scale it down, and he goes, "Well, and he goes, "Yeah, but sir, it's 1-to-1 model. If it's 1-to-1, it's not a model."
Michael Palin at his best, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So
Zoolander played with that with the school.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It's one of the funniest sketches. But anyway, my point being here is that there is that version of model, which I guess they're appealing to as being the kind of concept of model. But then there's this mathematical model idea, right? And when I think of the mathematical idea of model, I'm thinking of something like special relativity and general relativity.
I'm still here, by the way. My camera's again died.
Good.
I think, yeah.
I figured, so I just kept talking. So and these are much more than just some approximation, right? I mean, they have they're they're considerably more than approximations, right? They're accurate representations to the highest degree possible. Not certain, but certainly to a high degree of an abstraction of relating to reality, which the closest we can get. Right?
Absolutely, but
so,
even then you're agreeing that it's an abstraction, right? The map is not, even in this regard, the territory.
Well, yeah, but for a deliberate reason, of course, right? Which is that numbers, are, the way we use, or the number line is continuous, right? Reality is not. So, that's a. Unless you think eternity and infinity is an actual thing, which I happen not to.
One of my favorite things is to ponder reduction and what reductive theories are and how reduction works and what it means. And that is the same thing to do as a model, where you reduce it. Basically, you're leaving out a whole lot of details. But the thing about a reduction is it has a backbone that pretty much it corresponds to something powerfully central about the concept you're trying to come up with, right? And that's a reduction. And then from a reduction, you can always do construction and go back into the infinite, complexity of what you're really representing. But reduction is often abused, and it's often people get pissed off about reductive ideas sometimes, but reduction is not like that. I mean, it's not something that, it's not a bad thing. It finds that backbone model, basically.
Okay, so just to sort of point out the difference, right? The model, when used, certainly the way it is in mathematics, is the highest abstraction, right?
Yeah.
It's not to do with being a lesser abstraction. It's the most we can get to. And so I think that's why I have some. I mean, it's a really, like, semantic point I'm making here. So don't think it's any deep point or a criticism of the point you've put forward, because it certainly isn't. It's just that when I hear that word being used in this colloquial sense, then I think, well, that's not a technical word. Right.
Well,
that's why I think map should be the preferred term there.
Well,
right?
I don't know.
Maps of consciousness is the word.
I mean, again, there's different things we're talking about modeling here and mapping, but in any case, I think that the concept of modeling something, right, is separate from, like, the degree of sophistication of some modeling techniques. So in any case, I don't know whether we are using the language to point to a very specific type of modeling. Like you can create a plastic model of an aeroplane, right? And the degree of precision there is going to be very low in terms of resolution, but it's going to have a high aesthetic appreciation for the more model builder. So I think the concept is important more than necessarily the domains. Some domains will treat the term with a higher degree of precision than others, and again, we're back down. As you say, we're back down to that space where, depending on where we're talking. So for sure, but I think conceptually that there's still models. I'd be curious, by the way, just as a slight aside, I have what I arrogantly refer to as Willow's triptych, which is a propositional idea about the nature of reality, which is that I would hold that reality is either infinite, finite, or some other category of existence, and that an infinite universe is fully unintelligible to me conceptually as a finite being, or conceivably finite being in the universe, and so I can't really understand the nature of it. A finite universe also makes no sense to me, because I can't understand where the ex nihilo dynamic comes in. I don't understand what was before the existence of time and reality, what is after the existence of time and reality. That sort of domain of language doesn't even work in this area. So then we're into the final proposition, which is the nature of reality is fundamentally some other category of neither finite nor infinite, which of course makes no bloody sense to me. So the only thing I'm absolutely confident in saying about the nature of reality is it makes no bloody sense to me, and I'm fairly confident on the basis of my triptych that is the correct answer. And the weird thing is, from a positional position, some people are okay with that. I'm okay with that. I'm okay saying I have no idea. It seems an odd position to take, that some people claim to know the answer to that triptych with a high degree of confidence.
Yeah, I think there are there are dimensions which are less than 3 and more than 2.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that's kind
Set
of
theory.
when you chaos theory, actually.
Well, okay.
Well,
it was something I want to mention earlier. Neil Tyson had a similar quote to something you were just mentioning, Willow, and it's that the universe doesn't owe it to you to make sense.
Yes.
So this ideal that this thing has to be logical for us. If we understand our brains coming about in the context of evolution, it would make complete sense that the universe making sense to our brains, that was never in the cards. That was never an option.
I thought about this before. I talked about the idea of like being an ant, and if you're an ant and somebody is now pouring concrete into your ant's nest and you're about to die, in the moments before you die, you ask, why is this happening? And it turns out the reason is that the global exchange rate suddenly shifted somewhat, and a company that sold tires or something suddenly made a bit more money that year, and because they made a bit more money, they opened up a new office, and because they opened up a new office, they now needed to build more space for people who drive cars to park their cars, and so they needed a new car park. And so like, how is the ant going to contemplate this? And what a weird position it is that we feel we're in, that we're going to be able to be the sorts of people that can understand nature. And that's not to say we shouldn't try, because again, this is the problem with these kinds of acknowledging the limits of certain knowledge, is that all of a sudden we say, well, everything's valid, because of course we should try. And we know more and more about the world and the universe and reality, and we are discovering great things. It's a fantastic time to be alive in this regard, but also at the same time, there may just be limits to what we will ever be able to conceivably understand. And I think that if we can see that is true for the ant, we must concede that it's at least possibly true for us as humans.
Yeah, well, let me throw you one more. I hate to do back-to-back quotes on the same person, but Neil Tyson also said, if there are limits, when he was asked, I believe it was in an interview, I'm trying to think of the gentleman that runs a late night show. Anyway, he was asked, are there limits to human knowledge? And Neil's only answer was, if there are limits to our knowledge, we cannot afford to know them.
Yeah, well, yes, that's interesting. That's right. Well, good, fair enough. But yes,
there certainly are limits to our knowledge. There's no doubt
sure
about
there
that.
are.
Yes,
but I would just say, look, we, unlike the ants, we have the ability to do mathematics, and that's a modeling system for which there is no conceivable limit, right? So
Colbert, that was Stephen Colbert. He was being interviewed.
The domain of mathematics only operates within the domain of mathematics. So ultimately, that there's a guillotine-like division between the world of mathematics, the model, the abstraction, the conceptual space, where we are able to build with certainty, and the world of reality, the reality of the space that we're living in. And sadly, those domains are very, very different.
Well, I mean, yeah, but in principle, there is certainly no reason why there is anything in reality that couldn't be modeled by mathematics.
If there isn't, then I certainly would say I couldn't claim to know so.
Right.
That could well be the case. Like as I say, I'm certainly not saying that we could definitely know or know that it is provable, right? But one thing we can say for certain, I feel, is, because we're in the domain of mathematics, so certainty has a different meaning once again. But within that domain, I think we can say that there is nothing that in principle can't be modeled, right? Even if we can't know that it's true that.
Is there something that can't be modeled? I think quantum physics might push. I mean, again, not to invoke quantum physics mysticism or woo, but like ultimately that is a domain where we are observing phenomenon that we can't accurately. We can model to some extent, but we model with probability spaces, right? That's kind of saying, hey, numbers are breaking down here in terms of hard number descriptions of our reality.
Yeah, I don't buy that. I mean, we don't understand why. Right?
Sure,
we're having to do that.
I have the same intuition.
But that is, like it's demonstrable that it is the case that the mathematics for quantum physics works as well as any other mathematics we have.
Well, it certainly seems to work it doesn't work in a sort of traditional
group predictability.
Yeah,
or pattern predictability.
I mean, the idea that we think we're inching ever closer to grand unified theory, I think, is certainly an aspiration humans should not be have removed from them. I think the idea that we're constantly pushing towards that domain, I think, is a good thing. And I the idea that it's possible that there is such a thing as grand unified theory and that we will attain it, I think would be fantastic. And yeah, it's possible. It's possible, therefore, that we could have a model of reality that fully explains both macro and quantum physics.
Well, we have models, that's for sure. There are mathematical models that already do that. The problem, of course, is that they're currently unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
So they don't rise above mathematics into science.
Back down to Bertrand Russell's teapot. One question I did have.
I think it's a little bit different to Russell Bertrand's teapot.
I was trying to tie the show back to the beginning. I thought it was a callback, as they say. But the other question that I deeply wanted to ask Robert is how do you pronounce Neil Tyson's name?
You don't pronounce the last E. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, because I've heard Robert pronounce Neil deGrasse Tyson so many times now that I started to think, am I getting it wrong?
Well, see,
maybe it's just Neil deGrasse Tyson. I guess.
It is Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, I'm being certain, but I really probably shouldn't be certain about that. So
that's true.
I've never heard him say his name. So
that's true. No, but Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, is how it's pronounced. I will say with a high degree of confidence.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on a minute. There we go. I've just got to grab this here.
I'm gonna keep the Y on it for now, though.
Yeah, I did. I started to doubt that I was right, so I was like, "Oh, have everybody else I've heard pronounce this be wrong?" And then I also wondered if it was an in-joke that I didn't get.
No, just me.
Okay.
But yeah, it's probably Neil deGrasse Tyson. If I had to guess, I hadn't really seen the writing of it, but I've never heard him say it specifically.
Well,
no, fair.
Just to be clear, I'm not so sure anymore, so I'm just going to be quiet about it.
Fair enough.
Okay. I've just got this little banger to end on here.
Okay.
I'm just going to put it into chat for everybody. I've put it into the private chat already.
Okay.
But
what if Neil is pronouncing it wrong?
It says, what it's like being married to Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, I've seen this one. That is a nice one. How about that?
Yeah,
that's a funny one. That's a funny one.
I love those guys. Anyway, look, I'm just saying that that's my objection to using the word model, is that model is a slightly higher use of the word than map, right? When we use the word map, we actually mean the best we can mentally do, and in terms of philosophy anyway, then we're talking about the best mental models that we can create. When we're using mathematics to create a model, that's a very different process that we're going through in order to try to accurately represent the objective universe, or etc., whatever. So that's why I know you're using it in a colloquial sense, and that's absolutely fine, but that's part of the problem, like I said right at the beginning, right? And I know physicists are notoriously bad for using theory, right, when it's not a theory, it's a model, and they're notoriously bad for using model when it's a theory. So they make, I'm not saying that this mistake is not made all over the place.
Sure.
I'm just saying I would prefer people not to go further than the philosophical terms.
Which is fair enough to have the preference. But again, I think the mistake is not in or at least the problem can't be solved by saying we all need to just use this properly now. The problem has to be solved by recognizing that humans don't use language in this precise way consistently ever. And never have. And it will always change. And apparently literally no longer means literally anymore, and we're just in that world, and not only are we in that world, we've always been in that world, and it's been like this for a long time.
I don't disagree, but as we move forward with the sciences and other disciplines, right, the words, the language used in those disciplines become more technical and more rigid. As a result.
In those disciplines,
if you want to talk to another physicist, you're going to have to learn all about all of the the terms that they use in order to understand the theories that they're talking about, or hypotheses that they're talking about most of the time.
Sure.
So I feel that that's quite an important thing to recognize. And
In
then
those fields.
let's in any technical field, it's
for
that
sure.
case. So if this isn't technical, then that's fine. No
right.
problem
It's
at all.
colloquial, more so.
Yeah.
But with that said, we are coming up on the hour. We're going to do a little bit of a wrap up here. Unfortunately, William's camera is down, but we're still going to do a wrap up and ending on William here. Simos, y'all can check out Simos at simosfunk. YouTube at Simos Funk. It's in the side chat. Actually, he just posted a link. And Mike, where can they find you? Mike, you still with us?
Answers in Atheism is a YouTube channel.
There you go.
And we haven't been doing much lately, but Scott, we're gonna have to fix that anyway.
Yeah. All right. So last word, Simos. What you got?
Well, other than the point I just made, which I think is just one of my bugbears about language, I've got others. I read a bit of Wittgenstein, but I don't understand it all yet. So I reserve the right to change my language when and if necessary. And I don't disagree with the concept William's making at all. I think it's it's more than valid. It's a very important thing for humans to understand, that we operate off our maps, not off the reality, and that when we make mistakes, we've just got to keep checking back all the time with our maps to make sure that they are reflecting what we're saying, if we mean to make points about reality. And that's I think that's a really crucial thing to be doing. And I think if we started doing that in debates, there'd be a lot less bluster and a little more heat.
Excellent.
Light, rather. Yeah.
I'm gonna pull you off the stage. Stay tuned if you want to chat with us a little after the show, but I'm gonna pull you off. Scott, any last words there?
Yeah, shows like this, discussions like this, always make me feel less likely to speak up about things for about 2 or 3 hours.
Come on.
Should I really feel this certain about this? Should I even have an opinion on this? but it does make me wonder sometimes, like, what things am I certain about that I don't really have a right to be certain about, feel certain about? And then, what are the blind areas? And what are the things I still feel certain about, but I wouldn't be able to justify because I've been lazy or forgetful over the years about, like, how we know this or how we know that, and how you would discover this and that. Yeah. So that's what I'll be thinking about tonight.
Fantastic. Y'all can check out Scott. Sometimes he's over on the Saturday night at the Atheist on Captive Desk, and many times he does joint shows with Mike from Answers in Atheist. Mike, I'm going to pull you off. Appreciate it, man. I pulled the wrong one. My bad.
No problem. Talk to you later.
All right, Mike.
Yeah, we're like twins.
Yeah.
I don't got much. I just think we had to lighten up on picking on the word certainty and discussions about certainty. Anyway, good discussion. Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. We'll chat with you after. We'll let Willow wrap up here. All right, Willow, last thoughts on anything?
Yeah. I think it's fun times, I think as a great example of how language can be used differently, that the term to pull somebody off has definitely a different meaning over here on this side of the Atlantic. I don't know about the US, but it's been great fun. Lovely to speak to you as always, Robert, and Samos and the rest of the gang. Lovely to meet you all, and I've had a fun time. Where
can people find you?
Well, my home mostly, and if you turn up, I will be rude to you. But no, the deviantrobot.com is a website that I run. I also run a YouTube channel called Inspire Reflection, which I have done nothing on for several good for you, maybe like a year or so now. I'm not sure, but it's been a while. But I was thinking about kicking that off again, and actually it occurred to me, Robert, if you would like to, I would love to have you on as a guest, and we can have a conversation about your journey in life, and that's what I do on that channel. We talk to people about their journeys. Inspire Reflection is on YouTube, and then deviantrobot.com, which is a project that I'm working on at the moment, and there's going to be a lot of new exciting things happening with that project, which I don't want to talk about just yet because I feel I'll jinx it. So
well, fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, man. And I'd love to be on your show. You know how to reach me. Appreciate it, man.
Fantastic. Been a pleasure. Thanks,
All
Rob.
right, take care. All right, well, everyone, I thank you for joining us today. We had a lovely guest and a lovely panelist here to talk on the subject. Join us again next Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to have a complete open chat then, and anyone can come on and tell us about your thoughts. That having been said, remember to stay skeptical and be skeptical of your skepticism, and have a great day. Take care.